Adam Lucas joined us last year. In fact, earlier in the year, as North Carolina began the NCAA tournament, once the bracket was released, it eventually would play Baylor, beat them in Fort Worth, and go on to have a great run. And now on because of what a run it's been for Mack Brown in North Carolina. Adam, thanks for your time. I know basketball season's begun, and we know what it's like in Chapel Hill, but how much has this football team got the fan base a little bit engaged?
Well, I think especially now that they've clinched the Coastal and know that they're going to play in the ACC championship game against Clemson, a lot of excitement in Chapel Hill. The Tar Heels get to finish out with 2 home games. They've been on the road for several weeks now, and so to get to finish out with 2 home games is going to be a lot of excitement at Kenan Stadium.
Adam, with Drake Maye, he should be firmly in the Heisman conversation. How much does this now open up other recruiting for players who want to come and play with him for at least one more year?
Yeah, I definitely think it helps, especially if you're talking about guys who might play in 2023 to be able to say this is who's going to be throwing you the ball. And I think it also helps. Carolina's offensive coordinator, Phil Longo, was talking this week about just the number of NFL scouts who have been at practice just to get an early look a year ahead at Drake Maye. I think you can legitimately say Carolina's going to get visited by every team in the NFL next year multiple times. And so if you want to come to Chapel Hill and be on display for the decision makers at the highest level, then you'll have the opportunity to do that.
So, Adam, let's dive into Drake Maye because he is starting to get a lot of attention. You're hearing his name pop up all over now whenever college football comes up, and especially, Heisman-type talk. It feels like he's very much going to be on the radar for folks here very soon if he's not already. So break it down from your perspective, having seen the recruitment landing him, redshirting last year, glimpses, and now, what's obviously impressing anybody who's watching this year.
Yeah, well, Drake was originally committed to Alabama, as I think most good quarterbacks are at some point committed to Alabama.
Right.
But he does have that Carolina family legacy. His dad, Mark, played football here and was a very successful quarterback, and kind of in the era where, teams weren't regularly throwing for 450 yards, was one of the best quarterbacks that Carolina ever had. Of course, his brother Luke played basketball for the Tar Heels and hit a huge shot against Kentucky on the way to the 2017 national title. So he had those Carolina ties, and when Carolina made the coaching switch from Larry Fedora to Mack Brown, Drake got interested again. He had told Coach Brown he didn't want to go somewhere where he wasn't going to be able to win. I think Mack Brown showed that you could do that in Chapel Hill. Drake believed him, so he's here now. As far as skill level, I think he's a little taller than Sam Howell, who the Tar Heels had last year, who's now with the Washington Commanders, and I think that's helped him. But I think the surprising thing about this year has been how good he's been on the move, both running the football and just getting outside of the pocket to throw the ball. He's made a couple throws on the move that are NFL-type throws, and this is really his first full year of any sort of college competition. So you have to assume he's only going to get better. He's spread the ball around to a bunch of different targets. His number one target's Josh Downs, who probably has an NFL future also and is having a great 2022. But Drake's used everybody, guys out of the backfield, his tight ends, his other receivers. So he's really shown the ability to see the field. And to this point, he has not made a lot of costly mistakes, which is why Carolina's 9-1.
All right, so you just mentioned Josh Downs. Who, in your opinion, is more of an All-American, Maye or Downs?
Well, I think what Josh Downs has in his favor is that he's done it for a couple of years now. I mean, he clearly is one of the best receivers in the country and should be getting the Litnikoff Award consideration. The Tar Heels move him all over the field and line him up everywhere they can so defenses can't really get a fix on him. But I think it would be crazy to say that Drake Maye's not having one of the best seasons of any player in the country. So if you can only pick one, then I think you have to pick Drake Maye just because of the sheer video game numbers he's putting up. But I think that would be doing a disservice to both of them because I'm not sure either one of them is where they are without the other.
It's weird that you brought him up, and not because it's random because we're talking about North Carolina, but I'm voting for my All-American team, and Downs is on my first team at wide receiver. And what a year he's had, as you mentioned, also an NFL career. Paul?
Adam, look, this week is Georgia Tech, a team that cannot match them on offense, in any kind of reasonable game, but you never know. But then after that, it's NC State, a huge rival, and a team that, in spite of losing Devin Leary, has been remarkably resilient in winning all the games but one since that's happened. And then Clemson. How do you feel about this team's chances to win out and find themselves in the New Year Six?
Well, I think just the fact that the Tar Heels have the opportunity to do so is quite a pretty far jump from where anybody thought they were at this point, or even honestly about a month or two ago, because Carolina got physically manhandled by Notre Dame, and folks weren't sure they were going to make a bowl game. Now you're talking about the Orange Bowl or something else. I think the Tar Heels will probably beat Georgia Tech. The Jackets are on their third quarterback and second head coach of the season, which is usually not a good formula. NC State's a tricky one. I'm not I think people outside of North Carolina may think they're a little better than they are. But then, of course, Clemson is Clemson. They got all the talent in the world. But Carolina played Clemson in 2015 in the ACC championship game. And I think the Tar Heels went into that game feeling like if Clemson messed up, then Carolina had a chance. I think Carolina will go to this ACC championship game feeling like they at least have a chance to outscore Clemson, which is pretty much what Carolina has to do given the way the defense has played this year.
I'm glad you said defense. I was going to ask that coming up next, so let's talk about it. That defense, I know it's been problematic at times. It's it's a reason why they've had to score a bunch of points to win some games. But what have you seen as far as growth, maturation, and just kind of the tail of the defense as it's gone along this year?
Here's the thing about Carolina's defense in 2022. They're going to do exactly what they need to do to win the game and not 1% more than that. So, for example, this past weekend, Carolina really needed a turnover against Wake Forest. The Deeks have been scoring pretty much at will against Carolina's defense. And all of a sudden, Carolina comes up with a huge interception by Cam Kelly that changed the game and gives Carolina the chance to win. That's how it's been this year. The first half isn't real pretty. The second half is marginally prettier. But then when Carolina needs a stop, they somehow get it. And Cedric Gray, Carolina's linebacker, leads the Power 5 in tackles this year. He's got 108. So there are some good individual players that haven't always fit together perfectly. Gene Chizik is Carolina's defensive coordinator, who obviously knows what he's doing and has continued to make adjustments as the year has gone on. But even against Georgia Tech, I don't think the Tar Heels are going into that one thinking, well, we'll just turn this thing over to the defense and let them work. You just need the defense to keep them somewhat under control and let Drake May just try to move the ball up and down the field.
Is Drake May the difference from what last year was a disappointment?
I don't know that that's true because last year Carolina had Sam Howell, who's an NFL quarterback. And so it's not like they went from me playing quarterback to Drake May. I do think this year's leadership is better. This year's kind of upper class involvement is a little better. And just sense of ownership. But the biggest difference, honestly, is that a couple of close games early went Carolina's way. And as opposed to last year when a couple of close games didn't go Carolina's way and things spiraled from there. And I mean, the Tar Heels still went to a bowl game last year, but it was one of those bowl games that everybody goes to, not like the one that they're talking about this year. And I really think that early start, the way that Carolina somehow miraculously beat App State in Boone, and games like that. I mean, Carolina's 6-0 on the road for the first time in school history, and all six have been by a score by 6 points or less, 7 points or less. So one or two of those going the other way completely changes the season, and we're probably not having this conversation, but for whatever reason, this is the year that those games went Carolina's way.
Adam Lucas, GoHeels.com with us on 365 Sports.
Adam, if you had to power rank the football rivalries between the schools in North Carolina, I know that Wake Forest and North Carolina is a big deal. Obviously, the basketball rivalry is Duke. We had you on talking about that, last season. But it is weird. You have these four schools in North Carolina that I know basketball is more important than football. Where are the football rivalries there?
Carolina and NC State is the big one. Wake Forest really wants to be the big one, but no one really remembers that they're here. So it's hard for them to be the big one. But Carolina and NC State is first. I think Carolina Duke is probably second because they're actually playing for something. They're playing for the Victory Bell, which has been around a long time. And that was a great game this year. Mack Brown said yesterday he thinks that game-winning drive against Duke was Drake May's quote-unquote Heisman moment where people started taking him seriously. So I think that would be number two. And then everything else is just kind of in a bowl down there, and you can pick out whatever you want. And I'm not sure anyone outside of the state of North Carolina really notices that it's occurring.
So that means, I guess, these last 2 weeks, you really couldn't have shaped it up any better. I mean, they got to take care of Georgia Tech, obviously, but and they've clinched a spot. But in terms of closing out and, keeping on, I mean, to have NC State and Clemson back-to-back, I mean, there's no lack of motivation, is there?
No, and Carolina Duke used to be the traditional season ender, and Carolina sort of wanted to get away from that and wanted to end the season with NC State, because that game traditionally has meant a little more both for bowl implications and league implications and all sorts of stuff. So that's the way the program wants it. That's how it's going to be this year. NC State last year was one of those games that Carolina should have won and somehow miraculously managed to lose. So they'll have plenty of incentive going into that one, assuming that they're able to hold on against Georgia Tech this week.
You know, Adam, covering Baylor for as long as we have, since 2010, there was a stretch where they were just trying to win 3 non-conference games and then get to a bowl game because they hadn't been in over a decade and a half. North Carolina, this year they have Notre Dame, which is almost part of a quasi-conference game. But Florida A&M, Appalachian State, and I'm making fun of them. We know what they did to A&M, and Georgia State. Next year they have App State, South Carolina, Minnesota, so a couple of Power Fives in Campbell. Is there a chance they dip their toe in a bigger pond when it comes to a non-conference game? I know that their schedule seems to be pretty much loaded up for the next several years.
I think the biggest variable there is who's going to be in your conference. Is Notre Dame going to be a conference game? Is Carolina even going to be in the ACC? So I think you hesitate to play some of those games. And Carolina's gotten to where they'll play one of these kickoff games. They've played LSU, they've played Georgia down in Atlanta. Both those games. So they're going to do that every 3 or 4 years, almost kind of like a bowl game at the front of your season. But I just think given the uncertainty and also, honestly, given some of the scheduling preferences that have emerged, they want a couple of those to be winnable games, maybe one marquee-ish type game like a Notre Dame, and then one kind of in the middle, but you feel like you should probably win if things go well.
Just for my own curiosity here, Adam, if, realignment were to go wacko like it almost did the last couple of summers, and all of a sudden there's a Big Two. What is because you see all this speculation online, and North Carolina is obviously a very attractive brand, but are they more of a Big Ten school or an SEC school in your mind?
Really depends on who you ask.
Okay.
I think if it's an academic decision, Carolina definitely sees itself as a better fit in the Big Ten. You've got a lot of state schools in there that are very highly ranked academically, but you've got some travel that's not great.
Right.
In the SEC, you've got more teams that Carolina fans actually care about and want to go watch and see the Tar Heels play. But also the SEC doesn't play a lot of the sports that Carolina is really good at and that really values. Carolina's field hockey team is going to the Final Four this year and is undefeated, ranked number 1. The SEC doesn't have that, but the Big Ten does. And in fact, the 3 of the other teams in the Final Four are from the Big Ten. So going to be a lot of moving parts to that equation, but it's hard to imagine the ACC existing the way it does now 5 years from now.
Adam, basketball's tipped off. How much is what's going on this year? I know it's early. We have Duke and Kansas tonight, Michigan State, Kentucky tonight. Your thoughts about the Tar Heels?
I assume you guys are recording those games so that you can watch Carolina and Gardner-Webb.
Absolutely.
I know that's a big one on the national schedule tonight.
It's on the big screen.
Yep. Carolina's 2-0 and ranked number 1 in the country. Really haven't played all that well yet. The big difference from last year is Brady Manick's gone, kind of like he was in the second half of the Baylor game. He's gone. The Tar Heels brought in Pete Nance,
That's awesome.
a grad transfer from Northwestern, who I think everyone wants to be Brady Manick, but he's really a different kind of player. And so that's been the evolution here in the first part of the season, as the Tar Heels try to figure out the best way to utilize him and to figure out who on the bench is going to actually contribute, because Hubert Davis doesn't want to just play 5 players this year. He wants to get some more contributions, but so far nobody's really stepped up and earned those minutes. So that'll be an ongoing process before Carolina goes to Portland next weekend for the PK 85, which is loaded, and we'll learn a lot about the Heels out there.
Thank you, Adam. Good stuff. Good luck. 9-1, North Carolina rolling along, and it's kind of a team last year that got a lot of attention, didn't work out this year under the radar. Lost that game to Notre Dame 45-32, had that crazy shootout with App State, and here they are, going to play for the ACC title.